Welcome to Data Myths Podcast with your hosts, Brian and Malinda Gagnon.
So, a little about us. I'm interested in how tech helps us improve our lives. I have 20 years experience in digital communications. I'm an ex-Googler and now help launch new companies and products.
And I've spent 20 plus years evangelizing tech at some of the world's largest companies. Whether you're a dataphile or a dataphobe, we have something for you on this podcast. So get ready. Let's go.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Oh, I'm not bad. I actually feel rested once.
Amazing. It's amazing what can happen when you don't travel for 2 weeks straight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to actually working, this week.
Actually working.
Yeah, no.
Nice.
And actually spending time in the office.
Cool.
Versus traveling all over.
Yeah, I hear you. With you all the way. So what do you want to chat about today? What's on your mind?
So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the war on data that started this week between Shopify and Mailchimp.
Yes, there's some serious sparring and mudslinging going down, and it seems to be months in the making, but it just surfaced really last week with Mailchimp asking Shopify to remove them from their app store.
Well, and I think it's larger than that, right? I mean, these are some of the early shots of the war, right? You had a few months back, you had Facebook and Apple and Google going at it because, Apple was saying that people weren't using their users' data appropriately. Now we've kind of gone into the ground offensive here, and now we've got one of the major e-commerce players, Shopify, basically shutting off Mailchimp, which does a bunch of mail list management, etc. And basically, the two of them are no longer friends. I think they're gone straight to enemies at this point.
Yeah. It's been pretty interesting to see because typically when you have these type of partnerships, if they do decide to part ways, it's typically not with such fireworks as we've seen them going back and forth over the past week. And it's something that, of course, we're keeping really a close eye on because we work with a lot of new companies, a lot of startups, and want to give a big thanks to one of our sponsors, Uprise Partners, who help startups to launch and grow. So Shopify, Mailchimp, a lot of those getting started email, CRM, and e-commerce tools are just essential. So this is causing a lot of heartache for a lot of these businesses that are getting off the ground.
Yeah, and I would say we got quite a few calls this week from nervous vendors that have a shop online and trying to figure out what email provider they're going to use to send out all of their abandoned cart messages and all of that good stuff. So,
and people are definitely other tech companies that is are certainly jumping on the bandwagon to scoop up business. So, I mean, one in particular, Clavia, they have a banner at the top of their page. Mailchimp customer affected. Learn more. Come on over. So, it's definitely surging for advertising and messaging on all this stuff.
Oh, and it's not just them. There's like at least 4 or 5 different vendors that smell blood in the water, and they're invading the other edge of the country, so to speak.
Yeah.
While there's a main battle line drawn. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think when we really dig into it, this is just as people's data or as data starts to generate value, they are locking things down, or they're starting to look at that as a definite competitive advantage when they're playing games with the APIs like that and shutting people out.
Yeah. So let's talk about what this is a little bit more specifically. So we're talking Mailchimp. So they're an email service marketing company. They have a CRM platform. You can do a little advertising with it as well. They have some
I,
light
I would
e-commerce
argue,
functionality.
I would argue that they have a CRM platform, but that's for a different day,
It's like
right?
starter stuff. Yeah. They're really their bread and butter and their legacy has always been email marketing.
It's one step above an Excel
An
spreadsheet.
email newsletter company,
Yeah,
to put it precisely.
they're one step above an Excel spreadsheet, but that's okay. Don't tell them.
And for a lot of businesses starting out, it's great. It's cheap. It's easy to use. Low barrier to entry. Right. So okay. So that's Mailchimp. Then we have Shopify. So how would you describe Shopify?
Flat out e-commerce, right? So they are an e-commerce provider for, let's call it the small to medium size business. I think medium size business is probably escaping them a little bit, but for someone that's selling under 2 million bucks on the web, Shopify is probably a pretty good place to be.
Easy to use
a year.
templates, shopping cart functionality, and they have like 150 apps or something in their store to integrate with. So it's a pretty easy plug and play type of e-commerce platform.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot of development from them in a few years now, but I think they're still struggling. Last I checked, I don't think that they've turned a profit yet. So they've got that hanging out there. And then when you look at Mailchimp did $650 million last year or so. They're private. I would assume that they're making money at that clip. And now they're starting to move into the e-commerce space with some of their e-commerce pages and making it easy to put basically a page into Facebook or other places and landing pages so that it's really easy for people to sell. So
describe how this relationship, well, let's say used to work. Doesn't work that way now. But describe what that partnership is when you have this integration with Mailchimp and Shopify via the API and how that all works.
All right. Yeah, I mean, we're way down in the weeds on this episode.
It's important.
But that's okay.
Because that's why they're breaking up. It's because of all the details. We got to know the details to understand the drama.
Yeah, I hear you. So basically, you set up a Shopify store that has all of the pretty pictures and places where you can, add stuff to your shopping cart and as a consumer, buy product on the web. And it lets the store owner, put up all the great artwork and all of the great, pictures and collateral and all of that in a web format and be able to track that and do a number of things. Well, one of the things that from Shopify was a value add was that email list management. So I go and I want to buy something. I put it in the shopping cart and then I decide, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go price shopping a little bit. Or maybe this isn't a priority, but I'll come back to this later. Well, abandoned cart. So now what happens with the partnership or the way that it was working is that Shopify found a ton of value in integrating with Mailchimp because Mailchimp really does a great job with those automated lists and, sending notes out to people regarding their abandoned carts and getting some attached sales to that. So by doing that in an automated fashion, you're able to kind of capture a lot more of that revenue. So both sides of the equation have been pretty interested in keeping this alive, right? And vendors and merchants that are using the Shopify platform, this is really important because I think it's 60% of all abandoned carts. If you actually get to somebody really quickly, that could turn into a sale if you follow up. That's a pretty major economic number, right, for a vendor. So it's been, match made in heaven. Now, Shopify is starting to get nervous, right? I've seen a few notes from them in recent months about, hey, make sure that you're representing our platform. I guess a bunch of partners were actually telling people that maybe this wasn't the best platform. So they broke up with a bunch of their vendors and contractors and consultants and agencies. So that's been happening. And then, in the background, this whole piece with Mailchimp has been going on where essentially what they're saying is they want to be able to get data out of the Mailchimp platform. And even if they didn't capture that somewhere in the sales process for a merchant, they want to be able to get that data.
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest bones of contention here was, from what Mailchimp said, was that Shopify's new terms that are going to come in play on May 12th actually require them not only to pass information that's, of course, relevant to Shopify users, because that would be typical and fine, but also share retroactive customer data. So before basically they were even using Shopify, and Mailchimp is saying, look, why should they, get that information? Because that jeopardizes users' privacy.
And so this is really interesting because you have both sides of it, and they're both saying, they probably weren't the most professional in the rollout of this, either one of them. You've got Mailchimp saying, hey, we can't get along. We're not going to share the data because we want to make sure our customers' data isn't just shared for the sake of sharing it. And then the flip side of it is you've got Shopify saying essentially the same thing, which is our merchants, that's their data. So even though it's on a different platform, which happens to be one of our partners, they should be able to have access to that data all on one platform. Well, last I checked, that's not really, that's an argument, one platform. But to me, it seems like Shopify is probably getting a little nervous because in the last year, Mailchimp rolled out some e-commerce functions, right?
Yeah. Last year, so they've made a couple plays. So they launched shoppable landing pages last year, and they did that in partnership with Stripe. And apparently, Shopify chose not to partner with that. So sounds like that was on the table, and they backed out. The thing is with Mailchimp's e-commerce functionality, it is really light. So even though they're moving into that space, it's really not at all a competitor to Shopify. This landing page that they have launched, while it's had some significant revenue gains, it only allows for one product. There's no shopping cart. So it's great for, a promotion or a limited offer type of product, but it's pretty limited.
Well, so it's great that you brought that all up. Now let's fast forward a little bit. So it's April basically now. This just happened last week, or came out into the public last week. They said that they've been working on this for a couple months now. And then we also just find out that Mailchimp, in behind the scenes, just bought what company?
Lemon Stand out of Vancouver.
Okay.
So yeah, it's
So what does Lemon Stand do?
So they're an e-commerce company, so a light version of Shopify, and it was kind of a like acqui-hire type of situation, it seems. So hired the entire team, and basically Lemon Stand came out and informed all of their users that they were shutting down their service on June 5th. So they gave 90 days notice. Meanwhile, all of the employees of Lemon Stand on LinkedIn are now Mailchimp employees. So they're not saying much, but there you have it.
So I think that's Mailchimp's way of probably sticking up one of their fingers. I'm guessing it wasn't the pointer finger or the thumb,
Well, they claim that this was completely unrelated to the fallout with Shopify.
Well, they also said that they were or have been working on e-commerce for a little while now.
Yes.
So,
yes. And they did come out to say, and there was like very limited statement about this lemon stand acquisition, but they said they're, quote, helping us bring our e-commerce light functionality. So I mean, it's acknowledged that this is kind of entry level for, a company trying to sell something.
Well, so here's the interesting part with this whole thing. So I went out and said, okay, Shopify is clearly throwing down the gauntlet. Since that, 3 days later, they've actually backed off on their stance a little bit because the pushback was tremendous. They literally sent out a note to all of their different vendors saying that they had like basically a month to get off of Mailchimp, which is unrealistic for these types of merchants and vendors because typically they're smaller.
And anyone following this stuff, I mean, it quite frankly, it's just been a little comical because these statements flying back and forth. So the Shopify explanation. So they say, I'm quoting Shopify, it's critical for our merchants to have accurate, complete insight into their businesses and customers. And it isn't possible when Mailchimp locks in their data. Specifically, Mailchimp refuses to synchronize customer information captured on merchants' online stores and email opt-out preferences.
So here's the funniest part about that. So I went and read Shopify's API terms and conditions and partner terms and conditions. One of the things that they clearly have in there is that you can't use their API to develop a piece of software that takes data off of their platform. So in other words, they're locking you into their platform with your data.
Yeah. So hand over it all. Give us all of your data automatically and retroactively, and then you can't take it out.
Yeah.
It's a pretty great deal for Shopify.
I mean,
for anyone who agrees to that.
It sounds great. Trust us. Mm-hmm. Just trust us.
Yeah.
And,
and this goes back to, you mentioned it at the top of the show that this is related in some ways to the whole Apple shutting down Facebook and Google's use of their enterprise program. And it does come down to user privacy and really terms and conditions on how you use this service. So it's all absolutely related in how these companies are playing together, sharing information, and it's a question of who owns the data, but really who controls the data.
Well, and that's the interesting part, right? Because if you think about cloud services, for instance, this was one of the big arguments early on when Amazon AWS really started to make their stand in the cloud, which was, hey, if I'm an enterprise, I don't think I feel comfortable putting all of my data over in that basket, or having virtual machines or servers on your network, because what about if you start charging me more? What about if I find a better deal somewhere else? So some of that early technology was really focused around cloud ubiquity so that you could marketplace your data, right? And your platforms and be able to easily move that to Microsoft or Google or wherever else. So the cloud, I feel like, has already gone through these struggles, but now we're at the API level and you have these platforms that are a little bit more niche-y, shall we say, that are really trying to, carve themselves out, and they're looking at it as, hey, we have all this data. It's worth, X amount to us. And boy, this is great. Our network effect is growing just by the nature of having all this data. Look at us. This is fantastic. And it's, they're making some of these missteps. And, I feel like, the war has begun for data.
Well, and I think also with this particular business segment, so these are really startup technologies, small business technologies. And why aren't we seeing that in the enterprise space?
Well, for the most part, enterprises demand. So when an enterprise looks at something, Let's say JP Morgan Chase. When JP Morgan Chase looks at a technology, they are making sure that, first of all, they're not putting all their eggs in one basket because they can afford not to. So they write an RFP, or their team of architects is figuring out a way to architect something so that it doesn't ever take more than, 49% of their, ecosystem. That's part of it too. They have the resources and the smarts and wherewithal to have multiple strategies, right?
Well, and is it really because the enterprise players, there are only a few of them and they pretty much control the ecosystem
Yeah.
as it is? So we don't have this infighting because they already control it all.
Yeah. I mean, there's, when you come to CRM, for instance, there is NetSuite, there is Dynamics, there is, to a lesser extent, there is Salesforce. There are a couple other players, but for the most part, most everybody chooses from one of those. Coincidentally, each and every one of those is very open, have thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of integrations. It's very easy to get data in and out.
Because the customers demand it.
Because the customers demand it. Now, if you are a startup business or even a mid-sized business, 1 million to 100 million, maybe 200 million in sales a year, you've probably, had some migrations along the way where you started on that starter platform and you've kind of moved up a little bit, but you're not really thinking, you don't have the time to think, hey, we need to have a multi-platform strategy, or we need to make sure that we fully vet this, or we pay more money to buy an enterprise platform that allows us to get in and out. No problem. We're just going to do this because it actually fits in, Shopify Enterprise, for whatever it is, $2,200 a month. Let's just do that, and I'm not going to worry about that. Like, we should be able to get our data out at some point. That's a tomorrow problem.
Or they're just uninformed because a lot of businesses just getting started. They're not to the point they're thinking about that, and that's no fault on them. It's just you can only think of so many things at once when you're starting a business, and if you haven't done it before, it's just maybe won't come across your radar until, like we're seeing now, you're locked into a platform. And I think your comment is really interesting about like who is in control of their data, and it's kind of fascinating to think about, well, is that answer dependent on how big your business is? And enterprise level customers can control their data. Small guys, sorry. That's too bad.
Yeah. I mean, you get into a platform, look at, and we like HubSpot, right? We've used it a bunch internally for a number of different customers and clients and ourselves. And what I would say is they have a pretty good lock-in strategy in a way, right? They give away a CRM, to basically store all of your customers' information. But then there are all of these other add-ons, and then the price starts to go up. And then there are places where, there starts to be some lock-in, right? When you get into a platform like Salesforce, there's a lot less place to really get locked in other than the time it takes to implement that platform. So you get, when you get into the enterprise space, you're getting locked in based on the level of effort and customization you did, not necessarily the data and being able to, transit that data in and out of the platform. That's just expected when you're an enterprise customer. When you are working with an agency, not to disparage agencies, but I will. When you're working with an agency and, they're pushing you into Shopify or something like that, they're probably not thinking about these things because they're not implementing Salesforce or NetSuite in most cases. For an enterprise customer, they probably either have a team or they went to a boutique place that just does that, right? So you've got an agency that's focused on marketing or focused on e-commerce. They're helping. Shopify just makes it easy. So let's just go there. Then we'll get Mailchimp up and going. And if it locks the customer in, that's fine because we're making money, right? And I think that's the attitude on some of this stuff. When you get into those enterprise platforms, even if you're a partner in there and you're selling that stuff, there is no lock-in. If you sell something, you best be adding value on a regular basis, or whoever is your competitor, when they need an upgrade or something like that, that vendor is going to just toss you to the wolves and bring in your partner or competitor.
Yeah.
And some of these smaller places, it's all about, hey, well, the first partner that sold it, that's kind of the lock-in. So, there's lock-in upon lock-in upon lock-in.
Well, and, it's also comes down to the point of, you mentioned these enterprise customers, they're going to have basically a backup plan, right? They're going to have redundancy and plan for how they can make sure they always have control of their data, that it's secure, it's portable, and also service level negotiation. So service level agreement, when I just looked at HubSpot, and basically they say, we try to make the service available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except for planned maintenance. Well, any enterprise level SLA that I've ever looked at, we get down to, there's 99.9% uptime. Here are the days of the week, the hours where you can have maintenance. Anything above that, we're getting a refund. There's much more that goes into that.
Well, and it's funny you say that. So in the meat of this whole thing, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what happens to HubSpot and Klaviyo and all of these, because they also are Shopify partners. Now, HubSpot doesn't have an e-commerce play today, but are they going to share all their data in the opposite direction? Or was this a targeted approach to just get Mailchimp off of there? Because it seems like all of these other partners that do stuff very similar to Mailchimp are still on the platform. And I find it hard to believe they all said, hey, take our data.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, if this is a across the board terms update on the Shopify side that's rolling out May 12th, if a lot of these other partners haven't thought of their response yet, I think we certainly in the coming weeks are going to see a lot more news about this. If it indeed is doing what Mailchimp claimed, that they will automatically and retroactively pull in all that information.
I think Shopify shot across the bow first. I don't know if this was a good plan for them. I think they've got a lot more to lose than Mailchimp does.
They need their CRM partners. Yeah, they absolutely do, and they need their email marketing partners.
Yeah.
And just if anyone you're thinking about, well, how does this affect anyone we're working with? May 12th is when the new terms come out for Shopify. As of March 21st, the Mailchimp app is no longer available in Shopify for any new customers, but they're trying to work out the transition for current customers. So yeah, this has not been an amicable divorce, friends.
Well, and then you go to Mailchimp's homepage and they basically say, hey, don't worry about it. There are third-party players that still have access to your Shopify data, so we could just use them to get around it. So I'm guessing that
yes.
this battle is getting ugly.
Yeah. There's an article that Mailchimp publishes that basically says, there are alternate ways to connect your store. So it's ShopSync, Zapier, and Automate.io. So yeah, there are ways.
Yeah. Well, and I am still scratching my head because with Shopify specifically, I wonder what their strategy is with HubSpot, because we haven't heard about that. And, word on the street is maybe they hadn't heard about it, or if they did, they're being pretty quiet about it, which means maybe they're still negotiating as well on how much they want to share.
And maybe Shopify is just tailoring terms for their different partners. That could be it too. And maybe there's not much going on elsewhere, but we will see.
Well, this is going to be very interesting to see, because this is, again, people pushing the network effect, not on the number of users they have, but on the amount of data that they have. And that in itself, I don't think we have all of the full ramifications of it. You know, Apple did this once and tried to play a heavy hand, had to go back to Microsoft and Adobe and basically beg them to keep their apps on the platform. You know, I wonder if Shopify is going to have to do the same. And I think there's going to be a long list of others that this happens with. Adobe bought Magento, which is a huge competitor to Shopify, and they definitely scale up into the enterprise space.
And they have every tool you need to connect customers into the shopping ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Adobe's,
but
we know Adobe is a serious player,
right,
in this context particularly.
And so what does Adobe do at some point? Does Adobe start shutting down some of these partnerships because they have a lot more robust product? Maybe.
Well, and it's also worth thinking about, how Shopify could view like Mailchimp's quote unquote light e-commerce functionality as a threat. I will argue with myself with a point that I made earlier in this episode.
I love a good self-argument.
It's
Who might
a healthy
win?
Thing. So
you just don't know.
So I said, oh, well, they're not really a competitor because, this landing page, shoppable landing page that Mailchimp launched, it's only for one product. It's nothing like, the shopping cart functionality and what Shopify offers. However, this shoppable landing page that Mailchimp has is nothing to sneeze at. So they said that 50% of their revenue from 2018 came from their e-commerce functionality. That's $300 million. So that's significant. And looking at just the first half of 2018, their customers sold more than $22 billion in product on a landing page that sells one product, no shopping cart. So, you might think it's fluffy, but that's
pretty
real
amazing.
Dollars. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people are making stores out of just putting a shop on Instagram and building a whole business model around that. So I totally get the, just hit the button once and we have one product.
So maybe Shopify is feeling threatened.
I think they're feeling very threatened. And when I look at their platform, I don't see a whole lot of integration. You've got other players in the market, Squarespace, Webflow, you name it. They are all coming out with e-commerce platforms. And it's not because everything out there is just awesome. There's a reason for that.
Well, and I mean, this is a whole nother, topic that we can have a whole other podcast about, but it also, I think, is in response to consumer behavior that to have a really quick, seamless, simple shopping experience is super appealing. And sometimes you don't need all the bells and whistles of the quote unquote traditional e-commerce site. You just want that targeted thing that you can quickly buy on Instagram or, serve up with one page with that special item, a la Mailchimp shoppable landing page.
Hey, every once in a while, somebody wants to buy a hot dog from the corner vendor, in New York City.
True.
Right?
I don't understand your point.
My point is that there's a market for everything, and sometimes that's not real sophisticated. You give the guy $5 and a hot dog with a bunch of condiments that have sat out in the sun all day. Meet your maker.
Yeah, no, I agree. There is something for everyone, and there's something for one of a kind weird pottery crafts that you just toss up there in a landing page and you sell it. That's happening a lot. People are making businesses on Etsy and doing all sorts of things that we really don't think are a big deal, but in volume they are.
I mean, hell, I love 3-star Michelin restaurants, but I also like the churros that you can buy at the entrance of most every subway
Only place to
station.
buy churros.
Yeah, after 10 p.m., like, had a few drinks, let's get some churros. What could possibly go wrong in the tinfoil bag?
Nothing.
Right here at the subway.
Yeah, everything's good at that point.
So let's talk about the next piece, right? So data, obviously, huge concern. The war has started. So one of the things that I see is GDPR being used as the kind of the Y2K of the 99s, the HIPAA of the 2000s. Everybody would just say like, oh, well, you don't understand, like Y2K is coming. So we just have to do all these infrastructure projects, or, the world is going to stop working, or you wouldn't understand. This is HIPAA. We got to make sure that it's all HIPAA compliant. And, we need facial recognition to get into the janitor closet because, it's part of HIPAA. You just wouldn't understand.
So let me read something that Shopify said about this. Because, Mailchimp refuses to synchronize their information, all this. They say, as a result, I'm quoting, our merchants, other apps, and the partner ecosystem can't reliably serve their customers or comply with privacy legislation. So we
sounds like BS.
Don't have a lot of privacy legislation in the United States that's actually like passed. We have some things that are proposed. So yeah, I wonder what they're talking about specifically about privacy legislation.
I personally think that some of these fear, uncertainty, and doubt tactics take place whenever you have something new like that. I had someone ask me the other day, "Hey, we don't have this wording on our website. Are we at risk of getting sued? Because I heard that there are companies that just sue if you don't use like a certain color palette and it's not perfectly."
Well, that's to have a website that's accessible to people with visual impairments.
I get it, but all I'm saying is
case, yeah.
There are fear tactics around this stuff to get people to move. I used to work for a huge storage company that would scare people all the time into buying all kinds of add-on services and add-on products just off of fear alone, right? And I think some of this is starting to happen with data where people are like, oh, hey, you're not going to be compliant if we don't hold all of the data for you. You might not be compliant. That could be bad. GDPR could come and take away all your snacks and your beer cart, at your startup. So trust us. Let us hold your data.
Right. And there's certainly, the FTC does have, of course, legislation around or regulation, I should say, around, protecting people's personal information. But in terms of, GDPR type of levels, we haven't gotten there yet. We've really relied on technology companies to police themselves under the rules of the road that exist for just any industry in terms of protecting consumer data. And we see data breaches happen all the time. And what's being done to actually punish or compensate?
Yeah. Well, and I've argued this when the Marriott piece came out, right? Our account was obviously affected by that. And my piece to that was, hey, this is going to continue to be a problem until someone gets sued, so righteously that it affects their business or puts somebody out of business. And that hasn't happened yet, really. And when it happens, then first of all, insurers are going to start, changing their tune and start pricing this into the market. So things like errors and emissions is going to get a lot more expensive. I looked at errors and emissions insurance for a data company I was doing some work with. And when they started asking questions about how much are you touching people's data, do you have a sole copy of it, or do they have, or is it a copy of it? The price, and I was like, well, price it out both ways, and the price was staggering. So that's starting to happen, but there hasn't been a lawsuit that really moves the needle, and it's coming. It's going to happen, and one of these companies is going to get sued out of business. And then people are going to pay attention and say, hey, this isn't just a rounding error.
Yeah, and it's obviously unfortunate that you have to get to that extent before we clean things up. But I mean, sometimes that is just the way things get prioritized in an organization. Well, we don't have to spend money on that yet. Let's get the bigger leak, the bigger problem.
Yeah. Well, I'll be interested to see what happens next in this saga, because I don't think this isn't just a Mailchimp and Shopify story. I think that the genie is now out of the bottle. We've seen a couple of these already in 2019 where major companies are kind of putting a stake in the ground. I think we're going to continue to see more of those. And I think partnerships in general are going to continue to blow up. Joint ventures are going to continue to blow up. And I think that's going to be par for the course until people start to figure out how do they co-value data, with their partners, so that they each have mutual respect of the exact, value of that data. Because until that starts happening, we're going to see a lot more people get gun shy with this and basically say, hey, I'm not going to let that happen to me. As a startup, I would personally be looking at how do I, if I have a place I have to put data or share data with an API or whatever, I would seriously be looking at a multi-vendor approach on how I build out my platform.
Well, and that is one of the really tough things with just the segment that these technologies serve, the startups, the small businesses, because this disrupts the way they're doing business so fundamentally, and they can't afford that downtime. And maybe they don't even have the skills on staff to figure out a different partner to rework things. So, that's what, we mentioned Uprise, that team is in the midst of triaging this for a lot of clients, but that's kind of the tough part in all of this.
Yeah, and I would say, as a startup company or, nascent technology, I think it's natural to make mistakes, or it's natural to get down a path because you just have to choose some platform. And sometimes the platform you start with isn't the one that you necessarily, move into the mid part of your growth and towards maturity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think it's really important to, revisit those strategies over time. We've done it a couple times where we start with one technology, and I've done this a bunch in the tech space. I know the different options, but again, if you've got 10 people getting into something that's an enterprise size that is best in class, probably fiscally doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense for the amount of features that you're using for that. So you get into something smaller, you might get a little locked in, and in some cases the strategy might be, hey, we got to rip this up and start over again and maybe get the data out however we get the data out. So I don't know. We've talked a lot about this. This was a fun one for me.
Yes. Well, we'll see how the drama unfolds. So we'll stay tuned.
Well, let's wrap it up. This was a good one. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks. Thanks so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have a question or an idea that would be great for us to include on the next episode, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at hello@datamist.com. You can also send us a note on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. And finally, want to give a big thanks to our sponsors, Infonomic Data and Uprise Partners. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next time.